to Fiction Mage. Tonight, we invite you to settle in, breathe deeply, and begin a quiet journey through a world of imagination, memory, and beloved characters. Let the story guide you gently, one scene at a time, toward rest. This is an unofficial, transformative story, written and assembled by a human author with the help of artificial intelligence. All original characters and worlds belong to their respective creators. Now, make yourself comfortable and enjoy the reading. If this story helped you relax, dream, or simply enjoy a peaceful moment, please like the video and subscribe to Fiction Mage for more stories. The Blue Flower, a fan fiction from Final Fantasy VII, Part 1, The Tiny Bud. Chapter 1, The Demoiselle Café. Before dawn, Kalm held its breath. The canal below Bluebell's window was still only a long strip of dull pewter, and the flower boxes on the sill had not yet found their colours. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, a gondola rope creaked softly against its post. Somewhere farther off in the square, the great Marco tank gave its patient hum, so constant that most people no longer heard it. Bluebell heard it only in the way one heard one's own pulse when the world became too quiet. Monsieur heard nothing he considered worth troubling himself about. He lay across the end of her bed, black and white and splendidly inconsiderate, occupying the blanket with the solemn authority of a lord who had conquered it in ancient war. One white paw rested over Bluebell's ankle. His whiskers twitched as if he were conducting dreams too refined for human company. Bluebell opened her eyes before the clock on her little table had finished clearing its throat for the hour. She did not wake all at once. She returned by degrees, first to the smell of linen dried in yesterday's sun, then to the cool air of her room, then to the weight of Monsieur, holding her in place. The old habit came next, smooth as a practice stitch. Sunday, café, early fire, quiches before luncheon, honey for the terrace tea. Check the strawberries before Liana stole the best of them from the bowl. She smiled at the last thought before she had quite decided to. Monsieur, she whispered, I have to get up. His answer was a soft thump of tail against blanket. That is not permission. The tail moved again, slower this time, as if issuing a decree. Bluebell eased her foot from beneath his paw with the care of a thief removing a jewel from a sleeping dragon. Monsieur cracked open one green eye. The eye held disappointment, accusation, and breakfast expectations in equal measure. Then he stretched, showing a pink mouth and sharp little teeth, and rolled onto the warm place her legs had left behind. Traitor, she said, but fondly. Her room looked gentler in an hour before sunrise than at any other time. The canal-facing window softened every edge. A stack of novels leaned against the wall beside her bed, their bookmarks sprouting from the pages like pressed leaves. A small sewing table stood beneath the window, threaded with a half-mended hem, and 3 blue buttons in a saucer. On the shelf above it rested 2 narrow wooden boxes of Queen's Blood cards. She owned more cards than she had ever confessed to Liana, and far more than she had ever played. Collecting them was safer than losing with them. They could be admired, arranged, protected in their sleeves. They never asked for courage. Beside the boxes stood a little vase of cornflowers, beginning to droop at the stems. Bluebell made a note to replace them after service, if the day allowed. The day rarely allowed, but the note pleased her. Her dress for work had been folded over the chair the previous night. pale blue cotton, high at the neck, light enough for the kitchen heat, old enough to be practical. She had set her apron on top of it, washed, pressed, and folded, with the strings tucked inward. Seeing it there steadied her. There were mornings when the world seemed too large to enter bare-handed. An apron solved that. It gave the day edges. It told her where to place her hands. Bluebell crossed to the wash basin. The floorboards were cool beneath her feet, and the metal pitcher left a bite of cold in her palm. She poured water into the basin and splashed her face. The shock cleared away the last veil of sleep. In the small mirror above the basin, a young woman looked back at her with damp lashes and hair falling straight and pale over one shoulder. For an instant before she reached for the towel, the mirror gave her someone else. Not fully. Never fully. Just the line of her cheek, the fair hair, the softness around the mouth. A shape that belonged to a photograph kept in her father's room, and to the name he said carefully, rarely, as though it could break if placed too firmly on the tongue. Amira. The thought came and went quickly. Bluebell dried her face harder than necessary, then laughed at herself in silence, because towels were innocent things and did not deserve punishment. Monsieur jumped down from the bed and padded over, his claws making tiny, precise clicks on the wood. He brushed his side against her ankle, forgiving her for the disturbance now that he had remembered the possibility of food. "You are very generous," she told him. She brushed her hair until it fell smooth down her back, then twisted it into a simple, low braid for the morning, tying the end with a narrow ribbon. There were prettier ways to wear it. Liana had opinions on all of them. Liana also believed that pretty things should be used dangerously and often, while Bluebell preferred beauty that did not require an explanation. A neat braid did not flirt with anyone. A neat braid did not invite commentary. A neat braid kept itself out of the soup. She dressed, fastened the buttons, and slipped into her stockings. The apron came last. Bluebell lifted it from the chair, shook it once, and wrapped it around her waist. The strings crossed at her back, returned to the front, and tied beneath her fingers in a clean, firm knot. She always tied it twice. The first knot held the apron. The second held the day. Behind her, Monsieur gave a brief, questioning chirp. "Yes, yes," she said. "Breakfast for emperors and monsters." He trotted ahead to the door, tail upright, and she followed him into the narrow upper corridor. The rooms above the Demoiselle Café were still dim. Her father's door was closed. Paco's, at the end, was shut as well, though a faint line of light under it suggested he had already come and gone. Bluebell paused near his door without meaning to. From within came no sound, only the ghost of salt and soap that seemed to cling to Paco's things, no matter how many months he had lived inland. Costa del Sol survived in him stubbornly, in the way shells kept the sea. She caught herself listening to nothing and continued down the stairs. The café slept under her. Each step carried her from the private world of folded dresses and cat fur into the place Kalm knew. The stairwell opened behind the service counter, where the polished oak waited in a bar of shadow. The brass bell near the front door was still silent. 6 wooden tables stood with their chairs turned upside down on top of them, legs pointing toward the beams like small dark trees after a storm. The stone floor held the night's coolness. Along the walls, jars of preserved cherries and pears caught the low lantern light. Ceramic teapots lined the shelves. round and patient. On the mantel above the fireplace, porcelain figurines watched over the room with painted smiles, while the clock ticked its tiny nails into the morning. Bluebell loved the cafe most before anyone entered it, not because customers spoiled it, they completed it, but before the first order, before the first complaint about too much milk or too little shade, before the tourist questions and the gossip and the clatter, the Demoiselle belonged to its own breath. Wood smoke folded into old plaster, dried herbs hung in the corner, chalk dust waited at the menu board in her careful handwriting from the night before. Through the canal-facing windows, the water caught a thin seam of silver. At the far side of the room, near the terrace doors, Paco was sweeping. He had rolled his sleeves to the elbows, and the broom moved with an easy rhythm across the stone. Sweep, turn, draw in, step back. He worked as if the whole floor were part of a dance he had learned on some sunlit deck between ports. A seashell charm hung from a leather cord at his wrist and clicked faintly when his hand shifted on the broom. His dark hair was still damp from washing. When he leaned to gather crumbs left by yesterday's last guests, the first light from the window touched the side of his face. Bluebell stopped on the final stair, only for a moment, a small moment, hardly large enough to be guilty of anything. She noticed his shoulders. She noticed the curve of his smile before he had any reason to smile. She noticed that he looked absurdly awake for a person who had spent half of Saturday balancing plates through a dinner rush. Then she noticed herself noticing and stepped down. The floor gave a soft creak. Paco looked up. His smile arrived at once, warm and careless, the sort of smile that never asked permission before entering a room. "You beat the clock again," he said. "One day, Bluebell, time will complain to your father." "Time can join the queue," she said, crossing to the counter. "The jam merchant complained first yesterday." That was not a complaint. That was a tragic speech about apricots. "You promised him I would taste every jar before deciding." A generous offer. "You volunteered my tongue." Paco leaned on the broom and looked solemn. A tongue of judgment is a sacred public service. Bluebell removed the cloth from the pastry case and folded it into quarters. "Start with the tables before you found a religion around preserves." He laughed, and the sound bounced lightly off the still walls. It ought not to have warmed her. Many things ought not to have done many things. Paco laughed with customers, with merchants, with old women who scolded him for leaning too far over the counter. He smiled at tourists who mangled the names of dishes, and at children who tried to pay for lemon biscuits with pebbles. His charm was not a secret garden. It was a public road, bright and much travelled. That was precisely why Bluebell set the pastry cloth aside and lifted the chairs from the nearest table. Usefulness, she had discovered, could rescue a person from almost any foolishness. One chair down, then another. Align the legs with the grout line. Wipe the table in circles, not lines, so the polish did not streak. Check the little vase. Remove yesterday's wilted sprig of mint. Replace it after breakfast. Fold the napkins. Count the cups. Paco joined her without being asked. They worked around one another in the old pattern, though nothing about Paco was old. He had come to Kalm 2 years earlier with a travel bag, a letter from a ship's cook, and a grin that had persuaded Laris to employ him before Bluebell had decided whether he was trouble. He was trouble, of course, not the kind that broke windows, the kind that opened them. "Quiches today?" he asked, setting down a chair. Cheese and herb. Onion if we have enough. We have enough. I checked the pantry. She looked at him despite herself. You checked the pantry before sweeping? I am a man of deep strategy. Also, Monsieur yelled at me outside the kitchen door, and I had to give him something or he would report me. At the sound of his name, Monsieur appeared from beneath the counter, having clearly eaten just enough to claim starvation again. He wound around Paco's ankle, then bit gently at the broom straw. See, Paco said, a tyrant. He has standards. He has teeth. Both are useful in management. Paco bowed to the cat. Forgive me, monsieur. I do not recognize your executive talents. Monsieur accepted the apology by abandoning him and leaping onto the chair Bluebell had just set down. She lifted him, turned him, and placed him on the windowsill instead. You are not a centerpiece. He settled among the shadows of the flower boxes with great dignity. They opened the shutters. Morning entered by panels. The pale plaster walls brightened. The chalkboard menu appeared in strokes of white and blue. Coffee, honey tea, toasted bread with berry preserves, cheese quiche for midday, butter pastry, garden salad, lemon biscuits. Bluebell touched the final letter of biscuits with her thumb, rubbing away a dusting of chalk that had escaped the line. Paco watched her hand. Your handwriting makes everything sound expensive. Good. Then perhaps people will pay. It makes coffee look like a poem. Coffee is more reliable than poems. Only before noon. She almost smiled too openly. To prevent it, she took the cloth and wiped the counter, though it was already clean. Paco's gaze lingered a beat too long for accident. Then he turned toward the kitchen door and nodded with theatrical seriousness. Chef Bluebell, he said, shall we wake the oven? The kitchen accepted them as if it had been waiting. It was compact and exacting, every shelf crowded but known. Copper pots hung above the stove, polished enough to catch small pieces of faces. The iron oven sat dark and heavy against the wall. A wooden prep table occupied the center, its surface scarred by years of knives, rolling pins, hot pans, and impatient elbows. Spice jars stood in soldierly rows. Bundles of rosemary and thyme hung from the ceiling beam, dry and fragrant. On the lower shelf, flour sacks leaned together in the half-light of the pantry. A bowl of brown eggs waited under a cloth. Bluebell lit the stove, coaxing flame from ember and tinder, until the first heat opened itself into the room. Paco fetched flour, butter, and the basket of onions. She washed her hands, rolled her sleeves, and placed the ingredients in a square around the board. Once the kitchen began, something inside her loosened. Not enough to become careless, never that, but enough for breath to move cleanly through her ribs. Eggs cracked, shells tapped the bowl. Butter gave way beneath her fingers, softening into flour. She rubbed the two together until the mixture became pale crumbs, then added cold water, drop by drop. Dough did not forgive impatience. Bluebell liked that about it. It rewarded attention and punished arrogance. A person always knew where she stood with pastry. Paco sliced onions with quick, sure movements. For all his wandering talk, his hands were disciplined in a kitchen. He knew when to keep quiet. He knew where she kept the second grater. The good cloth, the knife she hated, because its handle sat wrong in the palm. He knew that she salted eggs after beating them, not before, because Laris insisted it made no difference. And Bluebell insisted that difference was sometimes shy. Herbs? He asked. Thyme, parsley, and a little chive. Not too much, The chives have been warned. She pressed the pastry into tins. The dough cooled beneath her fingertips, obedient at last. Through the half-open kitchen door, the cafe brightened by small increments. The day was assembling itself around them. By the time the quiche shells rested in their tins and the onions had surrendered their sharpness in butter, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Laris Parks entered the kitchen with the first true light of morning behind him. He had tied his grey hair at the nape, though several strands had already escaped near his temples. Nearly 40, people said of him, as if the number surprised them. Bluebell supposed grief could make arithmetic look impolite. Her father wore a clean shirt and a dark waistcoat, both simple, both carefully maintained. His face still carried sleep at the edges, but his eyes, grey-blue like Bluebell's, moved at once over stove, table, ingredients, and his daughter. He always took account of the room before he entered it fully. It was one of his quiet magics. "You have both betrayed me," he said. Paco placed a hand over his heart. "Sir, the kitchen is awake before its owner. This is mutiny." Bluebell lifted a tin of pastry to inspect the edge. "You may punish us by reviewing the accounts." Cruel child. Practical child. Laris came to the table and kissed the top of her head, quick as a blessing, then rested a hand on Paco's shoulder in greeting. The three of them settled into work with the ease of a familiar song. Laris checked the coffee beans, adjusted the stack of plates near the service hatch, and examined the chalkboard through the kitchen doorway. "Butter pastry as well?" he asked. "For afternoon," Bluebell said, "if the dough behaves." "The dough always behaves for you." "Only because I listen to its complaints." Paco lifted the onion pan. "I complain daily and receive no such tenderness." "Your complaints lack structure," Laris said. Bluebell laughed. She had not meant to, but it escaped, small and bright. Laris looked at her with a warm satisfaction he reserved for successes too private to mention. Her laugh dimmed into a smile, and she bent over the egg mixture. The first quiches went into the oven. Heat rolled out, carrying butter, onion, and thyme. Laris inhaled, and something in his expression changed before he could guard it. Bluebell saw the change because she always saw her father's silences, even when she pretended not to keep them lined up on a shelf in her mind. "Your mother loved that smell," he said softly. The spoon in Bluebell's hand paused against the bowl. Paco became very interested in wiping an already clean knife. The kitchen did not go quiet exactly. The oven breathed. The clock in the dining room ticked. A cart rolled somewhere outside along the stones. Yet between father and daughter, a little space opened, filled not with absence, but with something kept too carefully alive. Bluebell set the spoon down. She had good taste then. Her voice came out light. Good. Light was useful. Light could pass over deep water without showing what lived beneath. Laris looked at her, regret already moving through his face. She did. Bluebell reached for a cloth and wiped flour from the table, though the flour had harmed no one. The motion saved her from deciding what her mouth might do next. Smile too much. Tremble. Ask a question. Ask the question. What was she like when the oven was warm? Did she hum? Did she stand where Bluebell stood? Did she tie her apron twice? Instead, Bluebell folded the cloth and set it aside. "The terrace vases need fresh mint," she said. Laris accepted the rescue she offered him. "I will see to them. Paco, can you check the chairs outside?" Some tourists dragged one uneven yesterday, and Mrs. Everard nearly declared war on gravity. Paco saluted with the knife, then remembered himself and put it down before Bluebell could object. On it, he left them with the pan of onions and the smell of baked pastry beginning to lift. Laris remained beside Bluebell for one more heartbeat. Bluebell, it is all right, she said. It was not precisely true, but it was not precisely a lie. It was a bridge built quickly over a difficult stream. Her father touched the back of her hand with 2 fingers, a gesture so tender and brief that it hurt more than comfort would have. Yes, he said, of course. Then he went to open the cafe. The brass bell rang for the first time at 7:30. Old Mr. Fabre came first, as he did most Sundays, wearing a brown hat that had survived rain, summer, and several arguments with his wife. He ordered coffee with 1 spoon of sugar and 2 slices of toast with berry preserves, then pretended to consider a lemon biscuit until Bluebell put one on the saucer without asking. You read minds now, little flower, he said. Only easy ones, she replied. He laughed so hard that Laris called from behind the counter, Careful, Faber. We charge extra for insults enjoyed before breakfast. Then came Mrs. Everard, who inspected her usual table as if it had been travelling without permission in the night. 2 farmers from the North Road arrived with mud, still on their boots and apologies already prepared. A pair of tourists from Midgar followed, blinking at the beams, the plaster, the jars of fruit, the canal view, the polished counter. They spoke in lowered voices at first, as if rustic charm were a church service. Bluebell brought them coffee and explained the morning menu. The woman asked if the quiche was truly homemade. Bluebell did not take offense. Tourists from Midgar often distrusted anything that had not passed through a machine, a brand name, or a Shinra-approved delivery crate. Everything here is made in our kitchen, she said, except the coffee beans, which refused to grow in the pantry despite my encouragement. The woman laughed, surprised, and ordered 2 slices for midday. Before the quiches had even come out of the oven, the cafe filled by degrees. Plates clicked, cups warmed hands. Paco moved between tables with a quick grace that made service look easier than it was, translating complaints into promises and promises into fulfilled orders. Laris stood behind the counter, noting who had paid, who would pay tomorrow, who had lost weight, who needed a word, and who needed no word at all. Bluebell belonged everywhere at once. She refilled coffee before a hand lifted. She moved a chair so a child's feet would not kick the table. She remembered that Mrs. Everard preferred her honey on the side, and that one of the farmers would swear he wanted only coffee until confronted with toast. Outside, Kalm brightened into Sunday. Through the terrace doors, Bluebell saw flower boxes, spilling red and white along the canal. A gondola passed under the small bridge, its boatman standing straight in the stern, while 2 visitors leaned too far over the side to admire their own reflections. Market stalls were opening near the square. Somewhere, a dog barked at a cartwheel with enormous conviction. The rooftops held the sun. The distant shape of Midgar sat beyond the grasslands, pale and impossible. A metal thought on the horizon. Table 4 needs shade, Paco said, near Bluebell's ear. She turned. 3 tourists had chosen the terrace and were now squinting bravely into the sun rather than admit defeat. Bluebell took an umbrella key from the hook, crossed outside, and loosened the hinge with a twist. The canvas opened above them, scattering light across their table. "Perfect," one said. "This town is charming." "It does its best," Bluebell answered. The words came automatically, but she felt them after speaking. Kalm did do its best. Its shutters were painted. Its canals were swept clear of floating weeds. Its old stones were scrubbed by women who knew every crack. Its cafes opened early. Its merchants learned names. Its children ran messages between shops. And its lampposts glowed kindly at dusk. If the world beyond trembled, Kalm held up a cup and saucer and asked how much sugar one preferred. Bluebell believed in that. She needed to. By late morning, the quiches were ready. The oven released them in a breath of gold. Bluebell drew out the tray with both hands. Cloth folded thick between her fingers and the heat. The crust had browned perfectly, edges rippled and crisp. The custard set with a slight tremble at the center. Melted cheese gleamed across the surface. Chives shone green against the pale gold. The smell filled the kitchen, crossed the threshold, and moved through the cafe faster than any announcement. Conversations paused. Paco appeared in the doorway. "I believe the quiches have entered the room politically." "Do not let them become arrogant," Bluebell said, though pleasure rose in her chest. She let the tins rest, then slipped a knife between crust and edge. The first slice came free without breaking. That, too, was a form of grace. She plated it with a small salad of greens, radish, and a ribbon of herb oil, then sent it out to Mr. Faber, who had been pretending not to watch the kitchen door for 10 minutes. "Now," he said, lifting his fork, "this is civilization." The lunch rush arrived as if the word civilization had summoned it. Regulars came from market, from errands they suddenly decided could wait. Tourists drifted in from the square, drawn by the canal and the smell of pastry. Laris opened the terrace fully. Paco carried plates 2 at a time, then 3, then scolded himself cheerfully when one fork vanished into the wrong basket. Bluebell rescued a child from tears by replacing a dropped biscuit with another, too small to sell, though it was not too small at all. She convinced Mrs. Everard that the table by the window was not an exile. She sliced quiche, poured tea, corrected the chalkboard when Paco smudged the word salad with his sleeve, and packed 2 pastries for a traveller who wanted something sweet on the road to the ranch. Every successful motion returned something to its place inside her. Then the bell rang, with a violence entirely inappropriate for a doorbell, and Liana Stanlear swept in, as though the cafe had been waiting for its weather to change. She wore the Inn at Kalm made uniform with a degree of interpretation that would have caused a stricter employer despair. The skirt was regulation length, only if one measured with hope. Her apron had been tied neatly in front, then tilted by movement into a jaunty angle. Red curls escaped beneath her little cap. Her green eyes travelled the room, found Bluebell, found the quiche, and filled with theatrical suffering. "At last," Liana declared, "proof that mercy still exists." Bluebell balanced a tray against her hip. "Good afternoon to you, too." "Do not good afternoon me when you have been hiding quiche. It has been on the menu since yesterday. Hidden in chalk. Cruelty can wear many costumes." Paco passed behind her with 2 plates. "Liana, if you faint from hunger, choose the left side of the room. I just swept the right. You would let a dying woman fall for the sake of flooring? Stone is unforgiving. Bluebell, on the other hand, may offer quiche." Bluebell tried not to laugh, and failed just enough for Liana to notice. Her friend's gaze sharpened, delighted, and dangerous. Bluebell lowered the tray onto the counter. "Sit before you start composing your final words," she said. "Too late. I have prepared several. All of them mention cheese." Liana claimed the small counter stool near the service hatch, the one she claimed not to prefer and always took. She did not work at the Demoiselle, yet, somehow, belonged to it in the way certain birds belonged to certain roofs. Bluebell cut her a slice of quiche, smaller than what Liana would have chosen for herself, but larger than what Bluebell would have called sensible. "You are an angel," Liana said, accepting the plate. "You owe me 4 gil from Thursday." "A stern angel. 5, then." "A greedy angel." Bluebell gave her a fork. "Eat before I become worse." Liana took one bite and closed her eyes. For all her dramatics, her pleasure was sincere. It softened the angles of her face and quieted the restless tapping of her foot. Bluebell felt the old affection settle between them, familiar and untidy. She and Liana had known one another through awkward hems, broken cups, first monthly wages, secrets traded in whispers, and all the small humiliations that convinced girls the world was both enormous and survivable. "Broden lets you escape?" Bluebell asked. "Broden thinks I am fetching an extra order for a guest." "Are you?" "Eventually. One must not rush hospitality." Bluebell looked toward the door. "Liana?" "Fine, fine. I will bring him something. But if I collapse before reaching the inn, tell everyone I died in service to beauty. I will tell them you stole lunch. History is written by the heartless." Paco came to the counter for the next tray. "History also remembers debt." Liana pointed her fork at him. "Careful, Ramos. I know at least 3 girls in town who think you invented summer. I can ruin your weather." Paco grinned. "Only 3? I must be losing my touch." Bluebell became very busy arranging cups. Liana noticed that too. She waited until Paco had moved away, then leaned toward Bluebell over her plate. "Well," Liana said, using a teasing tone. "No," cut Bluebell almost too sharply. "I did not say anything." "You said well. It was not innocent. My wells are full of fresh water and civic concern. Your wells are full of frogs." Liana's grin widened. She lowered her voice, though not enough to become truly private. "He smiled at you. He smiles at tables. He smiled at you differently. There are not categories of Paco smiles. There are at least 6. Customer smile, merchant smile, old lady smile, child with sticky hands smile, caught breaking a cup smile, and Bluebell smile. Bluebell stacked saucers with a necessary precision. One clicked too sharply against another. "You have too much free time at the inn. I have a scientific mind. You once believed parsley and cilantro were the same plant wearing different perfume. I was 11, and they were suspicious. Do not distract from the evidence." Paco appeared at Bluebell's side to retrieve the coffee pot. "Evidence of what?" Bluebell's hand tightened on the saucers. Liana smiled with the open sweetness of a cat beside a broken vase. "Of your crimes against the broom closet. Did you know Bluebell found dust behind the flour tins?" Paco gasped. "Behind them? No court would convict me." "I am the court," Bluebell said, grateful and irritated in equal measure. "And the sentence is that you take table 2 their coffee before Mrs. Everard decides thirst is personal." Paco took the pot, but his eyes flicked from Liana to Bluebell with amused curiosity. "As the court commands." When he left, Liana made a tiny victorious sound around her fork. "You see? I see a customer waving." Bluebell. I see quiche cooling. Bluebell parks. I see that if you are not careful, I will wrap your guest's order without pastry. Liana placed a hand dramatically over her chest. You would not dare test me after the lunch rush. Her friend studied her then, and the teasing softened into something warmer. Liana had always known how to knock at locked doors. More importantly, she knew when not to force them open. I only mean, she said, quieter, you are allowed to notice pleasant things. The sentence landed more gently than the others, and therefore went deeper. Bluebell wiped a crumb from the counter with her thumb. I notice many pleasant things. Quiche, clean cups, customers who do not ask if the canal has fish in it. Boys with sea bracelets? Liana. Handsome boys with sea bracelets? Your order for the inn is becoming smaller by the second. Liana laughed under her breath and returned to her plate. Fine. I will behave with unbearable dignity. That will be new. Do not be jealous of my growth. Bluebell escaped before her face could betray her any further. A table by the terrace needed water. Another customer wanted to know whether the butter pastry contained nuts. Mr. Fabre had somehow turned a simple request for the bill into a story about a cousin in Junon who once argued with a vending machine for 20 minutes. Work rose around Bluebell, and she stepped into it with relief. By early afternoon, the cafe began to thin. The rush loosened its grip, one table at a time. Farmers returned to the market. Tourists wandered toward the square with maps folded badly in their hands. Mrs. Everard left with 2 biscuits wrapped in paper and the satisfied air of someone who had not enjoyed herself, not at all, and would return Wednesday. Liana finally allowed Bluebell to pack 2 slices of quiche and 3 pastries for the inn, then kissed the air beside Bluebell's cheek because her hands were full, and because affection, in Liana's view, should not be postponed by parcels. Tell Mr. Broden the second slice is for his guest, Bluebell said. Absolutely. Liana, the guest of his heart may be me. 1 slice for Broden, 1 slice for the guest. Tyrant, messenger. Liana swept out through the bell's bright ring, leaving laughter behind her like a ribbon caught on a nail. Bluebell cleared the counter. Her feet ached. A line of flour had dried along her forearm. Her braid had loosened at the nape. These were good signs. A body marked by work had proof it had belonged somewhere for the day. She carried cups to the kitchen, then returned for plates. Paco had gone to bring in 2 terrace umbrellas before the wind shifted. Laris sat at the far corner of the counter, with the account book open and a pencil balanced behind his ear. He was watching the room rather than the numbers. You were excellent today, he said. Bluebell looked down at the tray. The quiche behaved. I was not speaking of the quiche. She bent to gather spoons from a table. Compliments were more difficult to hold than hot pans. Paco helped. He did. Still. Her father's voice carried no pressure. That made it harder. Bluebell glanced up and found his expression gentle, a little tired, full of a pride he rarely displayed before others. For one treacherous instant, she wondered if her mother had ever stood beneath that same look. The question rose almost to speech. What did she do when you praised her? Then 2 tourists at the window lowered their voices, and a different thread caught Bluebell's attention. Lower sectors are worse every year, the man said. He wore a mid-guard jacket too warm for Kalm, and kept rubbing his thumb over the rim of his cup. You cannot smell the drains from up top, of course. They hide everything under steel and call it progress. His companion made a nervous sound. Careful. I am not saying anything political. I am saying the trains are late, the patrols are thin, and half the routes out feel less safe than they used to. A company that can build reactors should manage roads. Shinra manages plenty. For whom? The companion glanced toward the counter, toward Laris, towards the window where the square's Mako tank could just be seen between passing figures. Keep your voice down. We are here to rest, not start an argument. Bluebell stacked the plates more slowly. The words should not have mattered. Midgar was always sending out complaints with its tourists, the way travelers brought dust on their shoes. The lower sectors were far away. Patrol schedules were not her concern. Roads had always been difficult after rain, and monsters had always been bolder in warm months. A cafe could not repair the world. It could offer soup. It could offer a clean table. It could offer quiche at the correct temperature and coffee before a person's hands began to shake. Still, something in Laris's posture changed. He had heard. His pencil stilled above the account book. He looked not at the tourists, but past them, through the window toward the square. Bluebell followed his gaze. The Mako tank stood there in its familiar place, polished and enormous, pipes disappearing beneath stonework, lights pulsing faintly under Shinra's neat metal casing. It powered lamps, ovens, warm baths, streetlight, comfort. Children played near it without looking up. Bluebell had always found its hum reassuring. Today, only for a breath, it sounded louder. Paco entered with an umbrella under one arm and a strand of hair blown across his forehead. "Wind's turning," he said. "If we leave the far table out, it may sail to Junon by evening." The ordinary absurdity of the remark returned the room to itself. Bluebell blinked, then set the plates on the tray. "Then bring it in. We cannot afford adventurous furniture." Paco grinned and went back outside. Laris closed the account book, though Bluebell had not seen him write a number. When he rose, the stool legs scraped softly against stone. "I will check the pantry," he said. "I checked it this morning," Bluebell replied. "Then I will admire your work." He passed behind her and touched her shoulder once, lightly. She did not turn. The tourists finished their coffee and left a few minutes later, polite and subdued. Their cups held a bitterness darker than the grounds. Bluebell wiped their table until it shone. Then she wiped it again. The afternoon fell into quieter tasks. Paco carried the adventurous terrace table inside and declared it unrepentant. Laris sorted coins behind the counter, his movements steady again. A mother came in with a child who had scraped his knee by the canal. And Bluebell found honey water and a biscuit, because tears had many causes, and sugar could address at least two. Monsieur abandoned the windowsill for the fireplace, though no fire burned there now, and curled against the warm stone, as if storing the day for winter. Bluebell returned to the kitchen to prepare butter pastry for the late afternoon. The dough had rested in the cool pantry under a cloth. She lifted it out and felt its weight, the faint resistance that told her the butter had not softened too much. She dusted the board with flour. The rolling pin moved beneath her palms. Fold, turn, roll. Fold, turn, roll. Layers hidden inside layers, each one depending on patience. The work asked nothing of her but attention, and attention was something she could always give. Peko appeared in the doorway with a stack of clean plates. "Need help?" She almost said no. not because she did not need help, but because needing help made any task feel less contained. Then she remembered Liana's voice. "You are allowed to notice pleasant things." "You can slice the apples," she said. He stepped in, surprised enough that she felt a flicker of satisfaction. "The honorable apple duty? Do not make me regret it. I will treat each apple as a private citizen of great importance. Thin slices. Private citizens of thin importance." She gave him a look. He gave her a smile. Not a customer smile, not an old lady smile, not even a court-breaking-a-cup smile. Something smaller, less polished, less public. Bluebell looked down at the pastry before her heartbeat could make a fool of itself. In the dining room, the clock ticked toward the next hour. The canal light shifted from silver to honey. Her father moved somewhere beyond the doorway, humming under his breath, though he stopped whenever he realized he was doing it. Monsieur sneezed near the fireplace. A customer laughed softly at a table by the window. Outside, Kalm went on being beautiful, with the unself-conscious confidence of a town that expected tomorrow to resemble today. Bluebell arranged the pastry on the tray. Apple slices fanned across the top, each brushed with butter and dusted with sugar. Paco handed her the last bowl without comment, and their fingers nearly touched. Nearly was enough to make her aware of the warmth in the room, the flower on her wrist, the loose strand of hair at her cheek. She slid the tray into the oven. For a moment, when she straightened, the question from earlier returned. What did her mother do when praised? Did she blush? Did she scold? Did she flee into work with her hands too busy to tremble? Bluebell turned toward the dining room. Laris stood behind the counter, head bent over tomorrow's kitchen note. The afternoon light caught the grey in his hair and made it look almost silver. She could ask him. The day was gentle enough for asking. The cafe was quiet. Paco was rinsing the apple bowl. Nothing terrible waited at the door. Her mouth shaped the beginning of his name. Then the brass bell rang. A traveller entered, dusty and grateful, asking if there was still coffee and anything sweet left in the house. Bluebell felt the question fold itself back into the place where she kept all things that could wait. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped from the kitchen. "Of course," she said, offering the smile that had fed half of Kalm at one time or another. "Sit anywhere you like. The pastry will be ready soon." The traveller thanked her as if she had promised more than dessert. Perhaps she had. Behind her, the oven warmed. Butter began to melt between hidden layers. Sugar loosened into gloss. The clock ticked onward, patient and exacting. Monsieur settled deeper into his sleep by the fireplace, one white paw over his nose. Through the windows, the canal gathered the afternoon light and carried it past the cafe, past the square, past the Marco hum, toward whatever waited beyond the bend. Bluebell took a cup from the shelf, polished away a spot that was hardly there, and poured the coffee. The world had knocked softly once at the shutters. She had heard it. Then she returned to work. This is the end of the first chapter of The Blue Flower, a fan fiction in the universe of Final Fantasy VII. We hope you enjoyed your time with us. Like and subscribe if you wish to support our channel, and let's meet very soon for the next chapter. Take care of yourself and be kind to others.